Bradley, since when do we drive luxury cars? My mother-in-law, Carol exclaimed, her gaze sweeping over the sleek, black vehicle parked in their driveway. Well, Nancy's parents insisted we use their car for today, Bradley replied, a mischievous glint in his eye. My parents stepped out, subtly flaunting their high-end wardrobes. I straightened my skirt and walked up to Carol. I could feel her eyes appraising me, not missing the tiniest detail. Hi, Carol. It's good to see you. She gave a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. Nancy? Bradley joined us, putting a comforting hand on my back. Mom, Dad, this is Nancy's family, David and Susan. And this is Josh. Nice to meet you, David said, extending his hand. Carol barely shook it, her eyes darting behind him. So, what line of work are you in? She asked, her tone dripping with condescension. I run a tech startup, David replied calmly, ignoring her disdain. Interesting, she said, clearly uninterested. Her eyes flickered over to Bradley. Why don't we go inside? We all followed Carol into the house, where Jenna was lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Without looking up, she muttered, Oh, it's you guys. Bradley shot me an apologetic look. Jenna, can you at least pretend to be hospitable? Jenna shrugged, finally looking up and making eye contact with me. Nancy, love the dress. Very vintage. Thanks, Jenna, I replied, forcing a smile. Bradley's father, Robert, sauntered in, glancing at us like we were a disruption. Bradley, he said, barely nodding in my direction. Nancy. Hey, Dad, Bradley responded. This is Nancy's family. Robert acknowledged them with a cursory nod, then turned to Carol. Shall we? It was clear this gathering wasn't going to be a friendly family union. Carol led the way to the dining room, where a lavish brunch was laid out. My parents took their seats, doing their best to maintain a calm demeanor under the icy reception. As we sat down, Carol started talking about her latest charity event, her voice dripping with a sense of superiority. It was a grand affair. Only the elite of the city were invited, of course. Sounds delightful, Susan chimed in, trying to keep the conversation light. I'd love to hear more about it. Carol's eyes narrowed slightly. Oh, I doubt it's anything you'd be interested in, dear. Fighting back the urge to roll my eyes, I focused on my plate. Bradley squeezed my hand under the table, a silent gesture of support. So, Josh, what do you do for a living? Jenna asked, her tone surprisingly devoid of her usual sarcasm. I work in international tech relations, he said, his tone casual but firm. Oh, Jenna muttered, clearly not expecting a solid response. The rest of the brunch was filled with awkward pauses and forced small talk. Carol and Robert maintained their aloof demeanor, while Jenna alternated between half-hearted attempts at conversation and ignoring us altogether. As we finished up, Carol finally addressed Bradley directly. So, what's the plan for the rest of the day? We thought we'd show Nancy's family around town, Bradley said, smiling at me. Give them a taste of the local sights. Carol's eyebrows shot up. Our town isn't exactly touristy. I'm sure we'll manage, I interjected, trying to cut the tension. As we made our way outside, I couldn't help but feel a weight lift off my shoulders. Bradley wrapped an arm around me. You okay? Yeah, I sighed. It's just, you know. He kissed my forehead. I know, but we're in this together, remember? His words warmed my heart. As we got back into the car, I glanced at my family. Their support was my armor, shielding me from the cold judgment of Bradley's family. Together, we'd get through this. The first family dinner at Bradley's parents' house was a night I'll never forget. Carol and Jenna had made their approval or lack thereof abundantly clear from the start. As we walked into their grand dining room, the chandelier sparkled overhead, illuminating the tension in the air. Welcome, everyone, Carol said with a tight smile, the tone insincere. Please, take a seat. My parents, David and Susan, exchanged wary glances before sitting down. I grabbed Bradley's hand, feeling his warmth steady me. So, Nancy, Carol began as soon as we were seated, how's your little project management job going? It's going well, thank you, I answered, maintaining my composure. Project management, Jenna interrupted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Must be fulfilling. It is, I responded, trying to keep my tone neutral. Dinner progressed with Carol and Jenna steering the conversation away from anything remotely balanced. Every compliment felt double-edged, every question loaded with judgment. Nancy, have you ever considered improving your style a bit? Jenna asked, eyeing my dress. You know, something more like this? She gestured to her own designer outfit. I'm comfortable with how I dress, I said, smiling politely. But thanks for the suggestion. Bradley's grip tightened around my hand again. He had warned me about his family's elitist attitudes, but experiencing it firsthand was something else entirely. He tried to shift the conversation, but it was like steering a ship against a storm. Halfway through dinner, the doorbell rang. It was one of Bradley's old friends, stopping by unexpectedly. Bradley excused himself to greet him, leaving me momentarily alone with his family. Carol took the opportunity. Nancy, dear, I hope you realize how difficult it is for Bradley to adjust to your world. It must be quite the culture shock. Actually, we're very happy together, I replied, refusing to engage with her baiting. Bradley soon returned and picked up on the hostile atmosphere instantly. Did I miss anything? He asked, eyes narrowing at his mother and sister. Nothing of importance, dear, Carol said dismissively. After dinner, we moved to the living room for coffee. I sat between my parents, their presence a comforting anchor. Jenna's voice cut through the room. It's fascinating, David, that you own a tech startup. Such a humble profession. David smiled. Humbleness has its own rewards, Jenna. Not everything needs to be flaunted. Jenna scoffed, but David's calm demeanor didn't waver. Susan took my hand and whispered, Remember, we're proud of you. Bradley noticed the tension mounting again and decided it was time to leave. Well, it's getting late. Thank you for dinner, Mom. Carol barely acknowledged his gratitude. Drive safely. We stood to leave, and I couldn't help but glance at Bradley's father, Robert. Throughout the evening, he'd been silent, merely observing. As we stepped outside, Bradley paused, looking directly at me. Nancy, I'm sorry for their behavior. It's okay, Bradley, really, I assured him, squeezing his hand. No, it's not, he said, determination in his voice. We'll figure this out, together. We drove home in silence, but the resolve in Bradley's grip around the steering wheel spoke volumes. As we pulled into the driveway, I knew that this wasn't over. Carol and Jenna's disdain had ignited something in us, something we would confront head-on. At home, once we were alone, Bradley took my hands in his. We'll make them see, Nancy, I promise. I nodded, feeling the strength of his resolve merge with my own. Whatever it took, we would face this challenge together. Family was worth fighting for, and we were ready to fight. 3 weeks had passed since that disastrous dinner, but the biting remarks from Carol and Jenna hadn't ceased. If anything, they seemed to gain momentum. Nancy, darling, why don't you join us for tea tomorrow? Carol's voice trilled over the phone one afternoon. We need to discuss the upcoming charity gala. I hesitated, but ultimately agreed, knowing it would be rude to decline. The next day, I found myself sitting across from Carol and Jenna at an upscale tea room, the aroma of freshly brewed tea doing little to soothe my nerves. Carol wasted no time. Nancy, how do you plan to contribute to the auction? It's a vital part of our family's commitment to the community. I sipped my tea, steadying myself. I've thought about offering some project management consulting hours. It's what I do best. Jenna snorted. Do you really think anyone would bid on that? We need something elegant, something that represents our family's stature. Perhaps Bradley and I could donate together. We both have skills to offer, I suggested, trying to navigate their pointed questioning. That's not the point, Nancy, Carol interrupted, her eyes cold. You need to understand that our family has certain standards. It's not just about money, it's about perception. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of subtle jabs and condescending remarks. By the time I left, my head was spinning. The next evening, I lay on the couch, exhausted. Bradley walked in, immediate concern on his face. Rough day? Just another round with your mom and Jenna, I sighed. This time it was about the charity gala. He sat next to me, taking my hand. Nancy, I know they're relentless, but I promise we'll get through this. A few days later, Bradley and I attended another family gathering. This time, Carol's disdain seemed to be in full force. She barely acknowledged us as we walked in, her focus immediately shifting to a conversation with her friends about exclusive vacations. Oh, Bradley, Nancy, Jenna called out from the kitchen as we walked in. Do come and join us. Her smile was anything but friendly as she handed me a glass of wine. So, heard any more comments about your vintage style? I took a deep breath. Actually, yes. My boss said it's a great reflection of our company's creative spirit. Jenna's laugh was sharp. Well, that's unique. Carol entered the room, her eyes scanning me like an appraising critic. Nancy, dear, we've been meaning to talk about your role in the family business. Perhaps you should consider something more traditional. Bradley cut in sharply. Mom, Nancy is perfectly content with her career. We've talked about this. Ignoring him, Carol continued, You must admit, Bradley, that a more conventional path might benefit both of you in the long run. I felt my patience wearing thin. Carol, I appreciate your concern, but Bradley and I are happy with our careers as they are. Bradley's support was unwavering. We're building our life on our terms. The tension in the room was palpable. Jenna, sensing the rising conflict, attempted to steer the conversation. Oh, enough about careers. Let's talk about our new country club membership, shall we? Later that night, Bradley and I sat in our living room, the silence heavy between us. Nancy, I hate seeing you go through this, he said, his voice filled with frustration. We need to find a way to make them see us for who we are, not who they want us to be, I replied. I know, Bradley sighed. And I have an idea. We'll gather your family and come up with a plan. We'll show them that respect isn't bought with money. It's earned. I looked at him, relieved. Thank you, Bradley. Your support means everything to me. He smiled, determination lighting his eyes. We'll face this together, Nancy, whatever it takes. The resolve we shared was a step in the right direction. With a renewed sense of purpose, we prepared ourselves for the battles yet to come, knowing that our love and unity were our strongest weapons. Weeks flew by, but the tension only grew thicker. Carol and Jenna's continual snide remarks were taking a toll on me. I started staying later at work, trying to avoid the venom at family gatherings. But of course, they found ways to ambush me at home. One evening, Bradley and I were finally relaxing when the doorbell rang. Bradley opened it, revealing Carol and Jenna, their faces set in tight smiles. Surprise! Carol sang, stepping inside without waiting for an invite. We were just in the area and thought we'd drop by. Bradley's jaw tightened, but he managed a polite response. Mom, Jenna, this isn't a great time. We were just winding down. Oh, nonsense, dear. Carol dismissed him and plopped herself on our sofa. We won't be long. Jenna sauntered to the kitchen, opening our fridge. Do you have any sparkling water, Nancy? I can't drink tap. I forced a smile and handed her a bottle. Here you go. Bradley shot me a glance as if to say, hang in there. So, Nancy, Carol began in her usual patronizing tone, are you still working those long hours? Seems quite demanding for a project manager. It's fulfilling work, Carol, I replied, keeping my tone even. Yes, well, she sniffed, don't overwork yourself. Wouldn't want you burning out. Bradley jumped in. Mom, Nancy knows what she's doing. Can we just have a pleasant evening? Jenna, sipping her water, smirked. You seem tense, Brad. Anything we can help with? No, Jenna. He bit back. We're fine. They didn't stay long, but their visit left a bitter taste. Once they were gone, I slumped onto the couch, exhausted. Bradley sat beside me, rubbing my shoulders. I'm sorry, Nancy. They just don't quit. I know, I sighed. We need to do something, Brad. The walls were closing in, the relentless harassment straining our bond. That weekend, Bradley decided to have a serious talk with his father. He hoped Robert might help curb Carol's and Jenna's behavior. We went to his parents' mansion, hopeful yet wary. Over coffee, Bradley broached the topic. Dad, we need to talk about Mom and Jenna, Bradley began. Their constant belittling of Nancy is unacceptable. Robert blinked, surprised. Belittling? I'm sure they're just trying to help. Help, Bradley demanded. They're making things unbearable for Nancy. We can't continue like this. Robert frowned. Bradley, our family maintains a certain standard. Maybe Nancy needs to adapt. My heart sank at his words. Bradley stood, furious. Adapt? She's perfect as she is? Or can't you see value beyond your own prejudices? Watch your tone, Robert warned, standing up as well. We've built this life through hard work and status. Maybe Nancy just needs to understand that. Bradley's face turned red with anger. Dad, respect isn't about status. It's about how you treat people. If you can't see that, then you're blinder than I thought. He grabbed my hand, leading us out. We're done here, Dad, he called back, not looking over his shoulder. Back in the car, Bradley's anger was palpable. I'm sorry, Nancy. I hoped he'd understand. It's all right, Brad, I said softly. We'll find another way. Back at home, we sat with my family to devise a new plan. Determination fueled our thoughts, and we knew we had to stand our ground. If they wanted to judge us by their standards, we'd show them we could match them, and more. We'd face their snobbery head-on, with intelligence and dignity. As the evening wore on, a sense of camaraderie filled the room. We were ready to confront the in-laws' arrogance, knowing that true respect and love were worth fighting for. Whatever it took, we would reclaim our peace. The plan was simple yet bold. My family was on board, ready to show Carol and Jenna that their arrogance couldn't crush our spirit. We plotted carefully, every detail considered for maximum impact. One evening, while sipping coffee around our kitchen table, I brought it up. We'll need a car, something that screams luxury. Dad, do you still have connections with that car rental place? David grinned. I'll handle it. Consider it done. Susan chimed in, her eyes sparkling with mischief. And we can spruce up our wardrobes. There's an upscale boutique downtown. Let's turn some heads. Josh, my brother, leaned back casually. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve. I think Jenna will be quite surprised to see how we handle things. The following days were a whirlwind of preparations. We visited the boutique and picked out outfits that oozed sophistication. David secured the car, a stunning Bentley that would make even Carol do a double take. Come D-Day, we gathered at our place, reviewing the plan one last time. Everyone ready? Bradley asked, his voice steady but eyes burning with resolve. Ready, we echoed. We arrived at Carol and Robert's mansion just as a crowd was gathering for their latest event. Heads turned as we pulled up in the Bentley, my family stepping out one by one looking impeccable. Carol spotted us first. Her eyes widened, then narrowed suspiciously. Nancy, Bradley, what an unexpected surprise. Her tone was brittle. Mom, Dad, Jenna, Bradley said, his voice firm. We thought we'd join you tonight and introduce Nancy's family. Jenna sauntered over, her smirk faltering as she took in our attire. David, Susan, Josh, she greeted, her tone failing to conceal her confusion. You look different. David stepped forward, smiling warmly. We wanted to make a good impression. The evening continued, and whispers buzzed around us. Carol and Jenna's friends were clearly intrigued, but our performance was far from over. During dinner, the conversation shifted to business. Jenna couldn't resist a jab. David, remind us again what you do? With a casual air, David replied, Oh, I run a tech startup. We've had a few breakthroughs lately. Carol raised an eyebrow. Breakthroughs? Yes, he continued. We developed a new software that major companies are scrambling to license. Humble beginnings, but it's taken off. Jenna's facade cracked. Tech. Interesting. Josh, ever the charmer, leaned forward. Actually, I've been helping expand our international relations. It's quite fulfilling. The room buzzed with their replies, curiosity growing by the second. Carol's mask slipped, revealing genuine surprise. Well, that's impressive. Bradley's lips twitched in a restrained smile. You see, Mom, Dad, there's more to people than just appearances. Robert, silent thus far, finally spoke. Indeed, it appears we've underestimated your family, Nancy. His tone was less condescending, more reflective. But the crown jewel came when David stood up for a final toast. To family and understanding, and to knowing that real respect isn't bought, it's earned. As he spoke, it was clear, the in-laws' materialistic facade was crumbling. The room's atmosphere shifted, respect and humility slowly creeping in. Later, Bradley and I stood outside, the cool night air refreshing. That was incredible, Bradley said, his eyes glowing with pride. We showed them, I replied, feeling lighter than I had in months. They won't forget this, he added, wrapping his arm around me. No, they won't, I agreed. And maybe, just maybe, they'll finally learn what really matters. As we drove away in the Bentley, my heart swelled with hope. For the first time, it felt like we were truly seen. And that was a victory we'd cherish, long after the headlights dimmed. We decided to keep the momentum going. Our next appearance at Carol and Robert's house was going to be even more unforgettable. This time, we arrived in a Rolls-Royce, causing another wave of shock among the guests. As we stepped out, I felt a thrill of anticipation. Carol and Jenna met us at the door, their expressions a mix of surprise and skepticism. Good evening, Carol, Jenna, I greeted, keeping my voice steady but confident. What an entrance, Jenna said, barely masking her irritation. Is this another one of your parents' cars? David stepped in smoothly. Indeed, we thought it fitting for the occasion. Once inside, everyone's eyes were on us. Carol tried to regain control, her smile strained. Nancy, shall we talk in private? Bradley's grip on my hand tightened. Whatever you have to say to Nancy, you can say in front of everyone. Carol's eyes flashed with anger. Very well, Nancy, I hope you understand that appearances can be deceiving. It's easy to put on a show, but we are concerned with what's underneath. I met her gaze head-on. Our appearance tonight is not a show. It's a reflection of who we are and what we are capable of. We've worked hard, just like you. Carol's lips tightened. Hard work is important, yes, but so is knowing one's place. Bradley stepped forward. Mom, Nancy's family deserves respect. They've earned everything they have. Isn't that what our family values? Robert's voice cut through the tension. Carol, we've misjudged them. It's time we acknowledge that. Carol seemed taken aback for a moment, then rallied. Acknowledged what? That they can rent fancy cars and wear designer clothes? This does not change who they fundamentally are. David, calm and dignified, addressed the room. Our success is real, as is our integrity. We have always believed in respect, something this family seems to have overlooked. A murmur ran through the guests. Jenna, sensing a loss of control, whispered loudly to Carol, Are we seriously entertaining this farce? Bradley, his voice unwavering, said, It's not a farce. Look around, Jenna. These are the people you've belittled, yet they stand strong. They deserve your respect. The silence that followed was profound. Carol's face was red with suppressed rage, but she remained silent. Bradley continued, We've done nothing but prove ourselves while being constantly underestimated and disrespected. Josh chose this moment to speak, his tone casual but cutting. Respect should flow both ways. You can't claim to be superior while putting others down. It's not just hypocritical, it's shallow. Carol's mask slipped. You dare speak to me like that? Yes, Josh said simply, because you need to hear it. We stood there, defiant and united, the weight of their judgments crumbling around us. Bradley turned to his father. Dad, will you continue to support this? Robert, for once, looked uncertain. Things do need to change, he finally admitted. Carol glared at her husband, but refrained from speaking. I knew we'd struck a chord. This had been more than an event. It was a shift in the dynamic that had oppressed us for too long. As we left, Carol and Jenna's faces were etched with the realization that their power had waned. Bradley held my hand tightly, pride and relief mingling in his eyes. We did it, he whispered. Yes, we did, I agreed, feeling victory surge within me. Driving away, the sense of unity and triumph was palpable. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming our self-worth. We had challenged their scorn and stood our ground. For the first time, I felt free. Bradley's support and my family's unwavering strength had seen us through. Respect, real respect, was earned, and tonight we had taken a giant step forward in demanding ours. The day of the grand reveal had finally arrived. We assembled early at Bradley's parents' house, ready to host another gathering. This time, my father's success would be the centerpiece, revealing a side Carol and Jenna had never bothered to see. Carol's jaw visibly tightened when she saw the turnout. The driveway was packed with luxury cars, and our family blended in seamlessly. This wasn't just an impression, it was a statement. As we gathered in the sprawling living room, Dad cleared his throat, capturing everyone's attention. Thank you all for coming. I'd like to share a bit about our journey. Our humble beginnings shaped who we are, but they never defined our ceiling. The room fell silent, all eyes on him, Carol's included. She seemed unable to reconcile her preconceived notions with the reality before her. David continued, Our company, though rooted in simplicity, has earned respect in tech circles. We value innovation and hard work over ostentation. Jenna rolled her eyes, but her smirk was less confident. You mean you've been successful all this time and chose not to flaunt it? Correct, David replied calmly. We believe in letting actions speak louder than appearances. Josh took this moment to step in. For example, our latest project has secured multiple international contracts. We're about to expand significantly. Jenna's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly masked it with indifference. As for me, David added, I prefer staying grounded. My joy comes from seeing my family thrive, not from displaying wealth. The sincerity in his words was impossible to ignore. Carol shifted uncomfortably, finally speaking up. Why haven't you mentioned this before? Maybe because you never asked, I replied softly, but with conviction. Bradley joined my side, his support unwavering. Mom, Dad, it's not about money, it's about respect, something I hope you start to understand. Carol's face was flushed with emotion. We never meant any harm. We just wanted the best for our son. Bradley's eyes narrowed. The best? By hurting the woman I love? By belittling her family? Robert quietly interjected. We might have been blinded by our own standards. It's clear we need to reconsider our approach. Jenna, sensing an opportunity, tried to reconcile. Nancy, maybe we misjudged you. Perhaps it's time we tried harder to understand each other. I looked at her and for the first time saw a glimmer of sincerity. That would be a start. The room seemed lighter, the oppressive air lifting. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was progress. Carol and Jenna needed time to change, but the seeds had been planted. David lifted his glass. To new beginnings and mutual respect. Everyone raised their glasses, even Carol and Jenna, albeit slowly. The clinking of glasses solidified a tentative peace, one built on new understandings rather than forced agreements. Later, as we headed back to our car, Bradley wrapped his arm around me. Do you think they'll change? I think they'll try, I said, leaning into him. And that's a start. Driving away, I felt a cautious optimism. The battles of words and pride had taken their toll, but they also cleared paths for potential reconciliation. Bradley and I had faced the storm together, and now we might just be heading toward clearer skies. At home, we sat in the quiet of our living room processing what had unfolded. Whatever comes next, Bradley said softly, we face it together. I smiled, feeling a renewed strength. Together. With that, we had not only fought for respect, but had shown that real strength lies in unity and understanding. Whatever the future held, we were ready to face it, side by side. Months passed, and gradually, life took on a new rhythm. Carol and Jenna weren't transformed overnight, but there were changes. Small, yet significant. Our encounters were less strained, and the biting remarks that once filled the air had softened. One sunny afternoon, Bradley and I hosted a barbecue at our place. It was a casual gathering, aimed at bringing both families together. As the smell of grilled food filled the air, David and Robert chatted about tech developments while Josh and Jenna discussed international markets, surprisingly finding common ground. Carol approached me near the grill, a plate of marinated vegetables in her hands. Mind if I add these? She asked. Of course not, I smiled, stepping aside to make space. After a moment of silence, she began, Nancy, I've been thinking about everything. The events, the revelations, you've shown us a different perspective. I turned to face her, genuinely curious. And, with a deep breath, she continued, and I realize we've been unfair, judgmental. Bradley loves you, and that should have been enough for us. Her admission was unexpected. Thank you, Carol. It means a lot to hear you say that. She nodded, her face softening. It's about time I started treating you like family. We spent the rest of the afternoon in relative peace, the atmosphere light and friendly. Bradley, noticing the change, wrapped his arm around me. Looks like we're finally getting somewhere. It feels good, I admitted. Really good. Towards the evening, as the sky turned golden, David gathered everyone for a toast. To family, understanding, and new beginnings, he said, lifting his glass. To new beginnings, everyone echoed, the clink of glasses sealing the sentiment. Even Carol and Jenna seemed genuine in their response. Later, as everyone began to leave, Carol approached us. Bradley, Nancy, she began, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Thank you for giving us a chance to understand. We still have a lot to learn, but I promise we're trying. Bradley hugged his mom, a rare moment of vulnerability. Thanks, Mom. That means the world to us. As the last of the guests drove away, Bradley and I stood in the quiet of our backyard, the remnants of the day glowing warmly around us. Did today really happen? I asked, almost in disbelief. It did, Bradley smiled, and I think it's just the start. The weeks that followed brought more small but meaningful changes. Carol called me more often, asking for my opinion on family matters. Jenna, though still maintaining her sharp demeanor, began showing glimpses of sincerity. One evening, Bradley and I sat on our porch, reflecting on the journey. Remember when we said we'd face this together? He asked. Of course, I replied, resting my head on his shoulder. And we did. He kissed the top of my head. I'm so proud of us. Proud of you. Thank you, Bradley, for standing by me through everything. No thanks needed, he said softly. You're my world. As the stars appeared one by one, a sense of peace settled over us. The drama and conflict had given way to a new understanding, a stronger bond. Our relationship, tested by trials, had emerged fortified and unshakable. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, built on mutual respect and unwavering support. We had faced the storm, and now we were enjoying the calm, ready to face whatever the future held. Together, just as we'd promised.
I stared at my phone, reading the text message for the 5th time, my hands trembling slightly. I know what you're hiding, Maren. We should talk before Everett finds out. My mother-in-law's words glowed accusingly on the screen. My name is Maren, and until 5 minutes ago, I thought the worst thing about my relationship with my mother-in-law was her constant reminders about my food allergies. You know, the subtle jabs about how complicated I make family dinners, or how Everett's ex-girlfriend Camille could eat anything without making a fuss. I was standing in our kitchen, the morning sun streaming through the windows, when the message arrived. The coffee I'd been sipping turned bitter in my mouth. What could Lorna possibly think she knew about me? I'd always been an open book, sometimes to a fault. Hey, beautiful. Everett's voice made me jump. I quickly locked my phone and set it face down on the counter. He wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, and I forced myself to relax into his embrace. You okay? You seem tense. Just your mom being? Your mom, I said, trying to keep my voice light. She wants to talk. Everett's arms stiffened slightly. What about? She didn't say. The lie felt heavy on my tongue, but I needed time to figure this out. Probably another lecture about cross-contamination in her kitchen. He sighed, his breath warm against my neck. I'll talk to her again about the allergy thing. She needs to understand it's not a choice you're making to be difficult. If only that were the real issue. I turned in his arms, studying his face, the kind eyes, the slight worry line between his brows that appeared whenever his mother came up in conversation. Remember when we first started dating, and you told me your mom was a bit protective? He laughed. Understatement of the century? Just a bit. I managed to smile, but my mind was racing. What could Lorna possibly think she had on me? I never cheated, never lied about anything important. The only secret I kept was, but no, she couldn't know about that. Nobody knew about that. My phone buzzed again. Everett reached for it, but I snatched it first. Sorry, probably work, I said, stepping away. His expression flickered with confusion at my sudden movement. Another message from Lorna. I'm coming over this afternoon. We can discuss the photo I found while cleaning out the attic. My blood ran cold. The attic, where Walter, my father-in-law, had stored boxes of old family photos, including ones from before I met Everett. Before I changed my name. Before I became the person I am today. I need to run some errands, I said quickly, already grabbing my purse. I'll pick up dinner on my way home? Maren? Everett's voice stopped me at the door. You'd tell me if something was really wrong, right? I looked back at my husband, the man who'd loved me unconditionally for the past 5 years, who'd chosen me despite his mother's constant comparisons to perfect Camille, who didn't know that the woman he married had reinvented herself long before we met. Of course, I lied again, hating myself for it. Everything's fine. As I drove away, my phone kept buzzing with messages I couldn't bear to read. Lorna had finally found the ammunition she'd been looking for since the day Everett brought me home. The question was, what would she do with it? The truth about my past wasn't just my secret to keep. It was my survival story. And I'd be damned if I'd let Lorna twist it into something ugly. But first, I needed to know exactly what she'd found in that attic. I pulled into Lorna and Walter's driveway, my heart pounding against my ribs. The familiar colonial house loomed before me, its pristine white exterior masking the tension that always lurked inside. I'd driven here instead of running errands, knowing I needed to face this head-on. Walter's truck wasn't in the driveway, small mercies. At least I'd only have to deal with Lorna. Before I could reach the front door, it swung open. Lorna stood there in her perfectly pressed slacks and cashmere sweater, a manila envelope in her hands. I wasn't expecting you so soon, she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. But I'm glad you came. The formal living room felt cold despite the summer heat outside. Family photos lined the walls, dozens of them tracking Everett's life. I noticed, not for the first time, how many included Camille. 8 years of dating captured in frozen moments, while my 5 years of marriage warranted only 2 frames. Would you like some tea? Lorna asked, already moving toward the kitchen. I bought those special allergen-free cookies you can eat. Though I suppose that was unnecessary, wasn't it? My stomach clenched. What exactly do you think you know, Lorna? She set the envelope on the coffee table between us. I was cleaning the attic last weekend. Walter's been after me for months to organize all those old boxes. She paused, studying my face. I found something interesting in his old case files. Walter's career as a private investigator. Of course. I should have known he'd have access to that kind of information. Whatever you found. Sarah Mitchell, Lorna said quietly, and my world tilted. That was your name before, wasn't it? Before you became Maren Collins. I heard voices in the foyer, Walter's deep rumble and, to my horror, Everett's familiar tone. My hands started shaking. Mom, Everett called out. Your car's not in the garage, but the door was open. He stopped short in the living room doorway, Walter right behind him. Maren, what are you doing here? Perfect timing, Lorna said, reaching for the envelope. We were just about to look at some interesting photographs. Walter stepped forward, his face darkening. Lorna, don't. She's been lying to our son for years, Walter. He deserves to know who he really married. Mom, what are you talking about? Everett moved to stand beside my chair, his hand resting protectively on my shoulder. I stood up, shrugging off his touch. I can explain. Can you? Lorna pulled out a newspaper clipping. Can you explain why Sarah Mitchell disappeared 10 years ago, right after her father's arrest for running a Ponzi scheme that ruined hundreds of lives? Or why she emerged 3 years later as Maren Collins, with a convenient list of life-threatening allergies that make her seem so fragile and in need of protection? That's enough, Walter snapped, but the damage was done. Everett stared at me, his face unreadable. Maren, I changed my name legally, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I didn't do anything wrong. My father did terrible things, yes, but I helped the investigation. I'm the one who turned him in. After taking your share? Lorna pressed. The money that disappeared with Sarah Mitchell was returned to the victims. Walter cut in. All of it. I know because I worked the case. He turned to his wife, disgust evident in his expression. Which you knew when you found my files. You just chose to leave that part out. The silence that followed was deafening. Everett hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. I couldn't bear to look at him. I think, Walter said quietly, you should leave, Lorna.
Take a drive.
Think about what you're doing to this family. I'm protecting this family, she insisted, but her voice wavered. No. Everett finally spoke, his tone ice cold. You're destroying it. And if you ever try to hurt Maren again, you'll lose me too. I felt his hand slip into mine, warm and steady. But as we walked out together, leaving Lorna standing alone in her perfect living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. She'd exposed my past, yes, but she didn't know everything. And the parts she didn't know? Those were the ones that could really tear this family apart. The next morning, I found Walter sitting alone at the local diner, nursing a cup of coffee. He didn't seem surprised when I slid into the booth across from him. The breakfast crowd's chatter provided a buffer of white noise around us, making it feel safer to talk. You knew, I said quietly. All this time, you knew who I was. He pushed a manila folder across the table, different from the one Lorna had yesterday. I kept copies of everything. Figured this day might come. He paused as the waitress refilled his cup. What Lorna doesn't know is that I've been watching her, too. I opened the folder and froze. Inside was a photo of Lorna having lunch with Camille, dated just last week. She's still in contact with her? More than that. Walter's face was grim. They've been plotting. Lorna's been feeding Camille information about your marriage, your medical conditions. They're trying to prove your allergies are fake. My hands started trembling. Why are you showing me this? Because my wife is about to do something stupid. He pulled out another document. She's hired a private investigator, not me, obviously, to dig deeper into your past. But she's not going to find what she thinks she will, is she? I stared at my reflection in the window, remembering the scared 19-year-old girl who discovered her father's crimes.
No.
She won't. The money that disappeared? Walter's voice was gentle. The part she thinks you stole? I know where it really went. I know what you did with it. You never told her? Wasn't my story to tell. He leaned forward. But maybe it's time you did. Before she does more damage trying to protect Everett from a threat that doesn't exist. My phone buzzed, a text from Everett. Mom just showed up at the house. Says she needs to talk to both of us. Where are you? She's moving faster than I thought, Walter muttered, reading the message over my shoulder. Maren, listen to me. Lorna's not just afraid of losing Everett. She's afraid of losing her identity as his protector. After what happened with Camille. What had happened with Camille? I asked. Everyone tiptoes around it, but nobody ever tells me the whole story. Walter's expression darkened. Camille nearly bankrupted Everett. Convinced him to invest in her brother's business venture. It was a scam, but she claims she didn't know. Lorna had to remortgage their house to help him recover. That's why she's so paranoid about me being another con artist? I laughed bitterly. Ironic, considering my background. The difference is you exposed the con. You didn't profit from it. He pulled out one final document, a newspaper article I'd never seen before. It detailed how an anonymous source had helped return millions to the victims of my father's scheme. You gave up your inheritance to make things right.
My phone buzzed again.
Everett. Mom's saying something about proof. Please come home. I stood up, gathering the documents. I need to go. Maren. Walter caught my arm. There's something else you should know. About why Lorna's so fixated on Camille. He hesitated. Camille's pregnant. And she's claiming it's Everett's. The world tilted sideways. That's impossible. They haven't been together in years. I know, but Lorna wants to believe it. Because if it's true, then she has a reason to push me out completely. I felt oddly calm, despite the bomb that had just been dropped. When did Camille tell her this? Yesterday morning, right before Lorna found my old case files about you. He gave me a meaningful look. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? I thought about the pregnancy test hidden in my bathroom drawer, the one I'd been too afraid to take, about how everything was about to get infinitely more complicated. Thank you, Walter, I said, already heading for the door, for showing me what I'm really up against. What are you going to do? I paused, thinking about the other secrets I'd been keeping, the ones that could either save my marriage or destroy it completely. I'm going to tell my husband the whole truth, before his mother and ex-girlfriend can twist it into something else. I sat in my car outside our house, staring at the pregnancy test I'd finally taken in the diner's bathroom. 2 pink lines.
Clear as day.
The irony of this timing wasn't lost on me, my news versus Camille's claim. But first, I had to deal with whatever scene was waiting inside. Lorna's Mercedes was parked in our driveway, looking as pristine and polished as its owner always did. Through the living room window, I could see her gesturing animatedly while Everett sat with his head in his hands. The moment I walked in, Lorna's voice cut through the tension. Finally, now we can discuss Camille's situation like adults. There is no situation, Everett said, standing up. Camille and I haven't been together in years. This is ridiculous. She says differently. Lorna pulled out her phone. She has proof of a meeting 3 months ago. My hand instinctively went to my stomach, but I forced it back down. Let me guess, at the Cardinal Hotel bar? They both turned to look at me. Everett's face showed confusion, Lorna's triumph. How did you know that? She asked. I pulled out my own phone, finding the photo Walter had given me. Because I know about your weekly lunches with Camille. I know you've been plotting this together. I turned to Everett. 3 months ago, your mother arranged for Camille to accidentally run into you at that bar. But you never showed up, did you? I was with you, he said slowly. We were at the hospital. Your allergic reaction to the new medication, which your mother knew about, I added. She knew exactly where you'd be that night. Just like she knows my entire medical history now, thanks to the private investigator she hired. Lorna's face paled slightly. How did you? Walter told me everything. I placed the folder of documents on the coffee table. including what really happened with Camille and the investment scam. That's not relevant, Lorna snapped. It's completely relevant. I took a deep breath. Because you're so afraid of history repeating itself that you can't see what's really happening. Camille's lying about the pregnancy, Lorna. Just like she lied about not knowing her brother's business was a scam. Everett picked up the folder, his hands shaking slightly as he read. Mom, you've been meeting with her this whole time? Planning this? I was protecting you. No, he said quietly. You were trying to control me. Again. He looked up at me. What else haven't you told me? This was it. The moment to lay everything bare. Remember how I said I turned my father in? What I didn't tell you is why. I pulled out the final document Walter had given me. The money everyone thought I stole? I used it to repay his victims. All of it. Every penny I inherited, every asset I had. That's why I changed my name, not to hide, but to start over with nothing. Lorna grabbed the paper, her eyes widening as she read. This can't be. Your investigator won't find any hidden accounts or secret wealth, I continued. But he might find the thank you letters from the families I helped, or the testimony I gave that put my father away. I paused, my hand finally resting on my stomach. And now I need to protect my own family. Everett's eyes followed my movement, realization dawning on his face. Maren, I found out this morning, I said softly. Our baby deserves better than this endless suspicion and manipulation. So you need to choose, Everett. Both of you do. Lorna sank into the chair, the paper crumpling in her hands. You're pregnant.
Yes.
And unlike Camille's convenient claim, I can prove it. I turned to my husband. I love you, but I won't raise our child in this environment. Your mother needs help, Everett. Real help. Not enabling. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, a car door slammed and Walter's voice called out, Lorna? Are you ready to tell them the real reason you're so desperate to keep Everett close? I watched the color drain from my mother-in-law's face, and I realized we were about to uncover yet another layer of this family's carefully constructed facade. Whatever came next would either heal us or break us completely. But at least now, with my own secret revealed, I could face it honestly for my child's sake, if nothing else. Walter's words hung in the air as he entered our living room. The tension was thick enough to choke on, but Lorna's face, that's what caught my attention. Pure fear, something I'd never seen from her before. Don't, she whispered to Walter.
Please.
The pregnancy dinner is tomorrow, Walter said, ignoring her plea. Were you planning to serve that special cake you ordered? The one with the almond flour? My blood ran cold. Everett stepped forward. Mom, it's a family recipe, Lorna said quickly. I wanted to make something traditional to celebrate. To celebrate? Walter pulled out a receipt. Like you celebrated when you ordered that cake for Maren's birthday last year? The one that mysteriously got mixed up with a nut-free version at the last minute. I remembered that day, how Lorna had seemed almost disappointed when I didn't take a bite. How she'd insisted it was safe, but Walter had intercepted the plate. You knew about my allergies, I said softly. You knew exactly what almond flour would do to me. And now, Walter continued, with a grandchild on the way, were you hoping to prove Maren's allergies were fake? Or were you hoping for something worse? Everett's face had gone pale. Dad, what are you saying? I'm saying your mother has been testing Maren's allergies for years. Small doses, watching for reactions. Like some twisted scientific experiment. The room started spinning. All those times I'd felt sick after family dinners, the mysterious reactions that didn't make sense. I had to know. Lorna burst out. Had to prove she was lying like everything else about her. You don't understand. I can't lose him again. Again? Everett's voice cracked. What are you talking about? Walter moved to stand beside his wife. Tell him, Lorna. Tell him about the baby you lost before Everett. About how it broke you so badly you couldn't bear the thought of losing another child. I watched understanding dawn on Everett's face. The brother you told me died of SIDS. That wasn't the whole story, was it? Lorna's composure crumbled. I was allergic to the medication they gave me during the pregnancy. The doctors didn't believe me when I said something was wrong. By the time they listened, She turned to me, her eyes wild. When Everett brought home another woman with mysterious allergies, claiming she needed special treatment, special care. You thought I was faking, I finished. Like you thought the doctors thought you were faking. I had to protect him. By poisoning his wife. Walter's voice was harsh. By trying to prove she's lying, even if it killed her? The doorbell rang, making us all jump. Through the window, I saw Camille standing on our porch, one hand resting demonstratively on her stomach. Perfect timing, I said, feeling strangely calm. Should we invite her in? Let her explain how she's supposedly carrying your child, Everett? Or should we skip straight to the part where your mother orchestrated this whole thing?
No.
Everett moved to block the door. No more manipulation. No more lies. He turned to his mother. You need help, Mom. Real help. Not whatever this is. I'm trying to save you. You're trying to control me. And now you're trying to hurt my wife, my pregnant wife, to prove some twisted point.
He pulled out his phone.
I'm calling Dr. Richards. The same psychiatrist who helped you after James died. Either you agree to get help or what? Lorna's voice was barely a whisper. Or you'll never meet your grandchild. The words seemed to physically pain him. Your real grandchild. The doorbell rang again. Outside, Camille was peering through the window, her face falling as she took in the scene. I placed a hand on my stomach, thinking about cycles of pain and protection, about how fear can twist love into something dangerous. The cake, I said quietly. The one for tomorrow's dinner. Where is it? Lorna's silence was answer enough. Because I'm thinking, I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart, that we should all have a slice. Together.
Right now.
And see who's really telling the truth about what's inside it. The cake sat in the middle of the dining room table like a bomb waiting to detonate. Lorna had retrieved it from her car, her hands shaking as she set it down. Camille still stood in the doorway, her fabricated pregnancy story forgotten in the tension of the moment. You first, Lorna, I said, cutting a slice. Show us how safe your family recipe is. This is ridiculous, she whispered, but I saw the fear in her eyes. Is it? Because I have my EpiPen right here. I placed it next to the plate. And I've already texted photos of this whole situation to my lawyer. So, if anything happens to me, I let the threat hang in the air. Everett grabbed my arm.
Madam, stop.
You're pregnant. We can't risk. Can't risk what? I pulled away from him. Can't risk proving that your mother has been slowly poisoning me for years? That she was planning to do it again, even knowing I'm carrying your child. I never meant to, Lorna started.
To what?
Kill me? Just make me sick enough to prove I'm lying? My voice cracked. Do you know what it feels like, Lorna? When your throat closes up, when you can't breathe, and every second feels like drowning? Walter stepped forward. I have the receipt from the bakery. The order specifically requested almond flour. Stop. Lorna's voice was barely audible. Please, just stop.
Why?
I picked up the knife again. Isn't this what you wanted? To expose the truth. Camille cleared her throat from the doorway. I should go.
No.
I pointed the knife at her. You're part of this too. The fake pregnancy story? That was supposed to be the backup plan, wasn't it? If the cake didn't work? I needed the money, Camille admitted quietly. Lorna said. Enough. Everett's shout made us all jump. This ends now. Mom, eat the cake. Lorna stared at her son, tears streaming down her face. I lost one son. I couldn't lose another. So, you tried to kill my wife instead? I just wanted proof. She grabbed the fork, hands trembling.
Fine.
I'll show you. Everything happened in slow motion. Lorna lifted the fork to her mouth, but her hand was shaking so badly that crumbs fell onto her blouse. As she swallowed, her eyes went wide. Mom, Everett stepped toward her. Lorna's hand went to her throat. I can't breathe. Walter rushed to her side. Lorna, what's wrong? The medication, she gasped. My allergy to the new heart medication. My EpiPen clattered to the floor as realization hit. The same allergies she'd accused me of faking, she had them too. Different trigger, same result. Call 911, Walter shouted, lowering Lorna to the floor as she struggled for breath. I grabbed my EpiPen and knelt beside her. This will help, but it's going to hurt. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I saw everything. The fear, the guilt, the desperate need to protect what she loved, even if it meant destroying it. I saw myself in a twisted way. How thin the line was between protection and destruction. The EpiPen clicked as I pressed it into her thigh. Lorna's body jerked, her hand gripping mine with surprising strength. I'm sorry, she whispered as the medication took effect. I'm so sorry. Sirens wailed in the distance. Camille had disappeared, leaving the front door open. Everett stood frozen, watching his mother fight for breath on the floor, saved by the very person she'd tried to harm. The baby, Lorna gasped. Will you ever let me? That depends, I said, still holding her hand as the paramedics rushed in. On whether you get help. Real help. As they loaded Lorna into the ambulance, I stared at the cake still sitting on the table. One bite had almost killed her. One bite would have killed me. The ultimate proof of truth, delivered in the cruelest way possible. Walter turned to me, his face aged 10 years in the last hour. Why did you save her? Because, I said, watching the ambulance drive away, sometimes the best revenge is forcing someone to live with what they've done. 3 days after the cake incident, I found myself sitting across from Lorna in the hospital's psychiatric ward. The room was stark white, making her look smaller, older somehow. The bruise from the EpiPen injection was still visible on her thigh. Walter's leaving me, she said without preamble. Her voice was raw. Whether from the allergic reaction or crying, I couldn't tell. He's already packed his things. I placed my hand on my stomach, feeling the slight swell that only I could detect so far. Did you ever actually check the ingredients in that cake? Or did you just assume I was lying about my allergies, like you assumed everything else? She flinched. I was so sure that I was manipulating Everett, using my allergies to control him. I leaned forward. The way you used your grief over James to control your family? You don't understand what it's like to lose a child. No, but I understand what it's like to lose everything else. I pulled out an old photograph, me as Sarah Mitchell, standing next to my father at a charity gala. When I turned him in, I lost my name, my family, my entire identity. But I did it because it was right. Lorna's hands trembled as she took the photo. Why are you here, Marin? Because I need to know if you're capable of change. Real change. Not just for Everett's sake, or this baby's, but for yourself. A nurse appeared in the doorway with medication, but Lorna waved her away. I don't deserve another chance. Maybe not, but this isn't about what you deserve. I stood up, moving to leave. It's about breaking the cycle. Wait. Her voice cracked. There's something else you need to know. About James. About what really happened. I sat back down slowly, watching her face crumple. The allergic reaction? It wasn't just the medication. I'd been taking risks, eating things I shouldn't, trying to prove I wasn't really allergic, that the doctors were wrong. She wrapped her arms around herself. When I got pregnant, I kept doing it, kept testing my limits, until understanding dawned, horrible and clear. You blamed yourself for James's death. And then Everett brought you home, with your careful food checks and medical alerts, and all I could see was myself. My weakness. The same weakness that killed my baby. Tears streamed down her face. I had to prove you were faking. Had to prove it wasn't real. Because if your allergies were real, then you'd have to accept that yours were too. I finished. That James's death wasn't because you were weak, but because no one believed you. A sound from the doorway made us both turn. Everett stood there, his face ashen. Mom, how long have you been there? Lorna whispered. Long enough. He moved into the room, standing between us. Why didn't you ever tell me the truth about James? Because I killed him. My pride, my stupidity. No. I cut in sharply. The doctors killed him when they dismissed your symptoms. The same way you tried to dismiss mine. Silence filled a room, heavy with decades of unspoken pain. Finally, Everett spoke. I'm staying with Marin at her house. Walter's moving in with his brother. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But there's a treatment program in Vermont. 6 months, specialized in trauma and anxiety. They have experience with patients who have severe allergies. Lorna's eyes darted between us. You'd let me come back? After everything? Not come back, I said firmly. Start over. But only if you do the work. Only if you face what really happened with James and what you tried to do to me. And the baby? I touched my stomach again. Will know their grandmother when she's ready to be known. Really known, not hidden behind walls of control and fear. As we left the hospital, Everett took my hand. You're either the most forgiving person I've ever met or the most strategic. I thought about cycles of pain, about how revenge and healing sometimes look remarkably similar. Maybe both, I said. Maybe that's what breaking the cycle takes. Behind us, through the hospital window, I could see Lorna watching us leave, one hand pressed against the glass. This time, when she reached for her medication, she didn't wave the nurse away. 6 months later, I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing my dress over my now visible baby bump. The Vermont Treatment Center had called yesterday. Lorna was completing her program, and they wanted to arrange a supervised family session. Ready? Everett asked from the doorway. In his hands was a small box we'd received that morning from Lorna. I nodded, and he opened it. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a note. I found this in my mother's attic. It explains so much, maybe too much. The journal belonged to Lorna's mother, detailing her own struggles with control and fear. The last entry, dated just before her death, was an unfinished letter to Lorna. My darling daughter, I'm sorry for teaching you that love means control, for making you believe that protecting someone means owning them. She's breaking the cycle, I said quietly, touching the worn pages. Really breaking it. Walter met us at the treatment center, looking years younger despite the divorce proceedings. She's different, he said as we walked in. Really different. The family session room was bright, with comfortable chairs arranged in a circle. Lorna sat already waiting, her hands folded in her lap. The first thing I noticed was her medical alert bracelet, identical to mine. I've been baking, she said after we settled in the center's kitchen. They have protocols for allergen safety. She smiled slightly. Turns out I'm quite good at it when I'm not trying to prove something. Mom. Everett started, but she held up her hand. Let me finish. I've learned something important here. She took a deep breath. Control isn't protection. What I did, to James, to you, Marin, to this family, it wasn't about keeping anyone safe. It was about not feeling powerless. The therapist nodded encouragingly, and Lorna continued. I found these in my mother's things. She pulled out a stack of letters. She did the same things to me that I did to you, Everett. Made me doubt myself. Used my weaknesses against me. Called it love. Her voice cracked. But it's not love. It's fear. I touched my stomach as the baby kicked. Lorna's eyes followed the movement. I'd like to be part of your child's life, she said softly. Not as the controlling grandmother who needs to fix everything, but as someone who understands what it means to be different. To need protection sometimes, but not control. We'd like that, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. But we need to know this change is real. It is. She pulled out another letter, newer. I wrote to Camille's brother. He's agreed to repay Everett what he lost in the investment scam. It won't fix what I did, using Camille to hurt you both, but it's a start, Everett finished. After the session, as we walked through the center's garden, I found myself alone with Lorna. She stopped by a bench, touching the medical alert bracelet. You know what the hardest part was? She asked. Accepting that you and I are more alike than different. Both of us changed our names, running from our past. Both of us living with invisible threats. Both of us. Survivors, I finished. Not victims. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I named him James because it means supplanter, someone who takes another's place. I was so afraid of being replaced, I nearly destroyed everything trying to prevent it. I took her hand, placing it on my stomach where the baby was kicking. This little one? We're naming her Hope. Later that night, as Everett and I lay in bed, he asked, "Do you really trust her change?" I thought about the journal, about cycles of fear and control, about how healing sometimes requires walking through the darkest parts of ourselves. "I trust that she's trying," I said finally. "And sometimes that's the bravest thing we can do." On our nightstand sat the last page of Lorna's mother's letter, its final lines hauntingly familiar. "The greatest act of love isn't holding on. It's learning when to let go." The baby kicked again, and I smiled, thinking about names and changes and the future we were building, not despite our scars, but because of them. Some cycles, it turns out, are meant to be broken.
The notification from my banking app lit up my phone at exactly 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the time precisely because I was in the middle of a quarterly financial review meeting when my world started to crack. My name is Evie, and I used to think I had my life perfectly arranged, like the spreadsheets I spend my days analyzing. The message showed a withdrawal of $47,000 from our joint savings account. My stomach dropped as I stared at the screen, the numbers burning into my retinas while my colleague's voice faded into white noise. "Evie? The Thompson account projections?" I snapped my head up, meeting my supervisor's questioning gaze. "Sorry, I just need to. Excuse me for a moment." I grabbed my phone and practically ran to the bathroom, my heels clicking against the marble floor in an uneven rhythm. With trembling fingers, I called Travis. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. Of course. My husband's phone was perpetually set to silent when he was in the zone with his photography. I tried again. And again. Finally, on the 4th attempt, "Hey babe, what's up? I'm kind of in the middle of a shoot. Travis, why is there a $47,000 withdrawal from our account?" My voice echoed off the bathroom tiles, and I lowered it to a harsh whisper. "Please tell me this is some kind of mistake." There was a pause, too long to be innocent. "Oh, that. Yeah, I was going to tell you about it tonight. It's for some new equipment I need for this huge corporate gig I landed. The client's paying double my usual rate, so we'll have it back in no time." The explanation seemed reasonable enough, but something in his tone made my skin prickle. After 8 years of marriage, I knew when Travis was feeding me half-truths. What equipment costs exactly $47,000? I pressed. "Listen, I can't really talk right now. The client's waiting. We'll discuss it over dinner, okay? Love you." He hung up before I could respond. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, noting how the fluorescent lights made me look as pale as I felt. Something wasn't adding up, and if there's one thing I can't stand, it's numbers that don't balance. Back at my desk, I couldn't focus on work. Instead of analyzing market trends, I found myself logging into our online banking portal. The withdrawal had been made in cash at a branch across town. Travis hadn't used his card for any major photography equipment purchases recently. In fact, looking at his transaction history, there was a pattern of increasingly large withdrawals over the past few months that I'd somehow missed. When I got home that evening, the house was dark. A text from Travis said he'd be late, the shoot was running over. I sat in our home office, the blue light from his laptop casting shadows on the wall. He always left it logged in, trusting me completely. Or maybe he was just careless. I hesitated only a moment before opening his email. It felt wrong, invasive, but the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't let go. That's when I found the folder labeled Investment Opportunities. Inside were hundreds of emails from online gambling sites, payment confirmations, and desperate messages to someone named Victor about making things right. My phone buzzed with another text from Travis, "Grabbed dinner with the client. Don't wait up. Tomorrow night, I promise we'll talk." I closed the laptop and walked to our bedroom, where I opened his side of the closet. Behind his carefully arranged camera equipment and the vintage leather jacket I'd given him for his birthday, I found a stack of papers stuffed into an old shoebox. bank statements, loan applications, and at the bottom, a letter from a collection agency demanding immediate payment of $86,000. The Travis I thought I knew would never hide something like this. But then again, maybe I never really knew Travis at all. And that realization scared me more than any number on those statements. I barely slept that night, watching Travis's side of the bed remain empty until dawn. When he finally stumbled in around 6 a.m., I pretended to be asleep, studying him through barely open eyes as he kicked off his shoes and collapsed fully clothed onto the mattress. My brother Sam's law office was only a 10-minute walk from my workplace, but it felt like miles that morning. Each step was heavy with the weight of what I'd discovered. When I arrived, his secretary waved me straight through. Being the boss's sister had its perks. "You look like hell," Sam said, not looking up from his computer. When I didn't respond with our usual banter, he finally raised his eyes. "Evie?" I dropped the stack of papers I'd found in Travis's closet onto his desk. "I need your help." Sam picked up the collection notice, his expression darkening as he read. "Jesus Christ. 86,000? Plus the 47 from your savings?" He shuffled through the papers, his lawyer face settling in. "How long has this been going on?" "I don't know." My voice cracked. I thought I knew everything about our finances. "I'm supposed to be good at this, Sam. It's literally my job. This isn't your fault." Sam leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his graying hair. "Remember when Travis bought that vintage Harley right before your wedding? He sold it 3 months later. Said it wasn't practical." "No, Evie. He crashed it. Totally wrecked. But instead of telling you, he took out a personal loan to replace it before you found out." Sam's words hit me like a punch to the gut. I helped him with the paperwork. He swore it was a one-time thing, that he'd learned his lesson. The room seemed to tilt slightly. "Why didn't you tell me?" He was about to become my brother-in-law. He seemed genuinely sorry, and the amount was manageable. Sam's face softened. "I should have told you. I'm sorry." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A text from Travis's mother, "Maggie, dinner tonight? Haven't seen you both in ages. 7 p.m.? I showed Sam the message. He shook his head. "You should go. Keep things normal while we figure this out. I'll make some calls, see what kind of legal exposure you're facing." That evening, I arrived at Maggie's colonial-style house alone, having told Travis to meet me there after his shoot. The familiar scent of her lasagna filled the air as she pulled me into a warm hug. "Where's my boy?" she asked, leading me into the kitchen. "Running late. Client meeting." The lie felt bitter on my tongue. "Oh, he's been so busy lately. Did he show you the beautiful watch he bought last week?" Said it was a gift for a friend who helped him land that big corporate contract. My hand froze on the wine glass I was reaching for. "A watch? Aha. Must have cost a fortune. You know how Travis is, always going overboard with gifts. Remember that gorgeous painting he bought me last month? The artist was such a lovely young thing. What was her name? Lila something?" The room suddenly felt too warm. "I don't think Travis mentioned her." "Oh, you should see her work. She has this little gallery downtown. Travis has been helping her with photography for her upcoming show. Such a generous boy, just like his father." The front door opened, and Travis's voice called out, "Something smells amazing." He appeared in the kitchen doorway, and for a moment, I saw him through new eyes. His carefully tousled hair, the expensive camera bag slung over his shoulder, the easy smile that had made me fall in love with him. All of it felt like a carefully constructed facade. "Sorry I'm late," he said, kissing his mother's cheek before moving to do the same to me. I turned my head slightly, making his lips land on my jaw instead of my mouth. If he noticed, he didn't show it. Travis, honey, Maggie said, I was just telling Evie about that beautiful watch you bought. The one for your friend? I watched his face carefully, noting the slight tightening around his eyes. The way his hand paused for a fraction of a second as he reached for the wine bottle. Oh, right, he said smoothly. Just a thank you gift for a client referral. 3 lies in one evening, and dinner hadn't even started yet. I took a long sip of wine, wondering how many more revelations were waiting to shatter what remained of my marriage. The business card felt heavy in my hand. Davidson Investigations, discretion guaranteed. Sam had slipped it to me after that disastrous dinner at Maggie's, along with a stern warning about keeping everything legal. 3 days later, I sat across from Mike Davidson in his downtown office, watching him scroll through the photos on his tablet. Your husband's been busy, he said, turning the screen toward me. These are from the past week. The first image showed Travis entering what looked like a rundown sports bar. The timestamp read 2:14 p.m., right when he'd told me he was meeting with clients. The next showed him leaving 3 hours later, looking considerably more disheveled. But it was the third photo that made my stomach lurch. Travis was standing outside an art gallery, his hand on the small of a woman's back. She was laughing, her head thrown back, dark curls cascading down her shoulders. Even from the grainy surveillance photo, I could tell she was beautiful. That's Lila Bennett, Davidson said, his voice matter-of-fact. She owns the gallery. Your husband's been there 6 times in the past 2 weeks, usually staying for several hours. My throat felt tight. The watch? Davidson nodded, swiping to another photo. Travis and Lila outside a high-end jewelry store, his arm around her waist. The timestamp matched the day of the $47,000 withdrawal. There's more, Davidson said, hesitating. The sports bar? It's a known front for illegal gambling. Your husband's got himself mixed up with some dangerous people. A man named Victor Ramirez runs the operation. Victor. The name from the emails. How much does he owe? Davidson pulled out a manila envelope. Based on our surveillance and some conversations with inside sources, we estimate around $200,000. The $86,000 collection notice you found? That's just the tip of the iceberg. The room started spinning. $200,000. Our entire savings gone. Our future evaporated. Mrs. Mitchell. Parker, I corrected automatically. I'd kept my name after marriage, something that had always bothered Travis's mother. Mrs. Parker, there's something else you should know. Davidson's expression softened slightly. The gallery? It's not doing well. According to public records, it's 3 months behind on rent. But last week, someone paid all the back rent in cash. My laugh came out hollow. Let me guess. Right after the withdrawal? Davidson nodded. Your husband's playing a dangerous game. These people don't mess around when it comes to collecting debts. That night, I waited up for Travis. He came home around midnight, smelling of expensive cologne that wasn't his usual brand. When he kissed my cheek, I had to force myself not to flinch. How was your day? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Good. Productive. Got that corporate campaign wrapped up finally. He loosened his tie, heading for the shower. The one you needed the equipment for? He paused. Yeah, that one. Funny, I said, following him into the bathroom. Because I called your regular clients today. None of them have hired you for any corporate work recently. Travis froze, his hand on the shower door. You did what? Where's the equipment, Travis? The stuff you spent our savings on? You're checking up on me now? His voice took on an edge I'd never heard before. Going behind my back? Like you went behind mine with Lila? The color drained from his face. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the drip of the faucet, marking time like a metronome. "It's not what you think," he finally said. "Really?" "Because I think you're gambling away our future while buying expensive gifts for another woman." My voice cracked. "I think you're lying to me, to your mother, to everyone." "Evie, please." My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number: "Tell your husband he has 48 hours to pay what he owes, or things get uncomfortable." V. I held up the phone, watching Travis's face crumple as he read the message. Who's Victor, Travis? And what exactly happens when things get uncomfortable? Travis's confession came in pieces, each one more devastating than the last. We sat in our kitchen as dawn crept through the windows, the threat from Victor hanging between us like a blade. "I can fix this," Travis kept saying, his hands shaking as he poured his third cup of coffee. "I just need a little more time." Time for what? To lose more money? To buy more watches for Lila? His head snapped up. "Leave her out of this. She has nothing to do with." "With what? The gambling? The lies? Or just the part where you're destroying our life?" The silence that followed felt like glass about to shatter. I pulled out Davidson's photos, spreading them across the kitchen table like a twisted timeline of betrayal. $200,000, Travis. Where did you think this would end? He stared at the photos, his face ashen. I was winning at first. Big wins. The kind of money that could set us up for life. Then Victor offered to stake me for bigger games, and... He trailed off, running his hands through his hair. I just needed one more good hand. One more chance to make it right. And Lila? Was she just another bet? She's a friend. That's all. But he wouldn't meet my eyes. The gallery was going under. I couldn't let that happen. So you used our savings? Money we worked for, planned for? I used my inheritance from Dad. His voice was barely a whisper. The room tilted sideways. What inheritance? The life insurance money. It came through last month. I never told you because... He swallowed hard. Because I'd already lost most of it by then. I grabbed the edge of the table, steadying myself. The insurance money was supposed to be substantial, enough to start the photography studio Travis had always dreamed about. The future we'd planned together. How much was it? $300,000. My laugh came out like broken glass. So you're telling me you've lost $500,000? Our savings, the insurance, and now you owe money to criminals? Travis reached for my hand. I pulled away, my wedding ring catching the morning light. The same ring he'd insisted on upgrading last year, claiming his business was doing well enough to afford it. Was that bought with gambling money too? His silence was answer enough. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Victor, time's running out. Meeting at the usual place. 3 p.m. Bring the money or bring a lawyer. I'll talk to him, Travis said, reading over my shoulder. Maybe I can negotiate. No. I stood up, my decision crystallizing. You're done negotiating. Done gambling. Done lying. What are you going to do? I grabbed my car keys. I'm going to meet Lila. Evie, don't. You lost the right to tell me what to do when you bet our future on a poker game. The drive to Lila's gallery took 20 minutes. Each mile brought a new question, a new doubt. Had they laughed about me together? Had he told her about our fights, our dreams, our struggles? The gallery was small but elegant, tucked between a coffee shop and a vintage bookstore. Through the window, I could see her arranging photographs on a white wall. Travis's photographs. My husband's art, displayed like love letters for everyone to see. The bell chimed as I pushed open the door. Lila turned, her smile warm and professional. "Welcome to Bennett Gallery. How can I?" "I'm Evie Parker." I watched recognition flash across her face. "Or as you might know me, Travis Mitchell's wife." She dropped the photograph she was holding. It hit the floor with a crack, the glass splintering across the polished concrete. In that broken reflection, I saw both our faces, two women caught in the same man's web of lies. His wife? Her voice trembled. But he said he was divorced. That his ex-wife. Let me guess. That his ex-wife took everything in the settlement? That he's still paying off her debts? Lila sank into a nearby chair, her face draining of color. Oh God. The money he gave me for the gallery was stolen, I finished. Just like everything else. Lila and I sat in her back office, 2 cups of untouched coffee growing cold between us. Her gallery walls were covered in Travis's photographs, moments he'd captured while lying to us both. I recognized some of them from the days he'd claimed to be at client meetings. He said the money was from his photography business, Lila whispered, staring at her trembling hands. That he wanted to invest in emerging artists. My phone buzzed again. 2 hours until Victor's deadline. Did he ever mention gambling? I asked. She shook her head, then stopped. Wait. There was this one night. He was acting strange, kept checking his phone. Said he needed to meet someone about an investment opportunity. When he came back. She swallowed hard. His knuckles were bruised. The gallery door chimed. We both turned to see Travis stumbling in, his face pale and sweating. Evie, please, you can't be here, he froze when he saw Lila. I can explain everything. Like you explained being divorced? Lila stood up, her artist's hands clenched into fists. Or how you explained the gallery money. I was going to pay it back. All of it. Victor just needs. Victor? Lila's voice cracked. The same Victor who sent those men here last week? I felt the blood drain from my face. What men? They came looking for Travis. Said something about collateral. She hugged herself, shrinking into herself. They took some of the artwork. Said it was insurance. Travis stepped forward. Lila, I'm so sorry. I never meant. The sharp crack of her palm against his cheek echoed through the gallery. Get out. Both of you. I'm calling the police. You can't, Travis pleaded. Victor will. Will what? I demanded. Hurt us. Like he hurt you that night? Before Travis could answer, the gallery door chimed again. 2 men in expensive suits entered, their presence filling the small space like smoke before a fire. Time's up, Mitchell, the taller one said. Victor's waiting. Travis's face went from pale to gray. I just need 1 more day. No more days. The man's eyes swept over the gallery, lingering on Lila's frightened face before settling on me. Though maybe we can work something out. Victor's always had an eye for alternative payment methods. I felt something snap inside me, not like breaking, but like a lock clicking open. All the fear and hurt of the past weeks crystallized into something harder, colder. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone, I'd like to speak to Victor myself. Evie, don't, Travis started. Shut up. My voice was ice. You've done enough talking. I turned to the men. Tell Victor the first have a proposition. One that involves Travis's inheritance money. The shorter man raised an eyebrow. The insurance payout's gone, lady. Your husband blew through it weeks ago. No, I smiled, pulling up the email from Sam I'd received that morning. He only got half of it. The other half was meant to go to his mother, but there was a clerical error. The insurance company just released the funds this morning. I have access to the account details. Travis's eyes widened. How did you? While you were busy destroying our lives, I was actually trying to save them. I turned back to Victor's men. Tell him I want to meet. Just me. And tell him to bring proof of Travis's debts. All of them. The taller man made a call, speaking quietly into his phone. After a moment, he nodded. Victor will see you. Now. As we headed for the door, Lila called out, Evie? What are you going to do? I looked at Travis, seeing him clearly for the first time, not as the man I'd married, but as the stranger he'd become. I'm going to make sure everyone gets exactly what they deserve. The men led me to a waiting car, leaving Travis standing in the gallery doorway. His reflection fractured across the broken photograph still lying on the floor. In that moment, I realized revenge wasn't about hurting someone who hurt you. Sometimes, it was about making sure justice came in exactly the right form at exactly the right time. And I knew exactly what form Travis's justice needed to take. Victor's office was nothing like I'd imagined. No dark warehouse or smoky backroom, just a pristine suite in a downtown high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He sat behind a glass desk, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Mrs. Parker, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I appreciate punctuality in business matters. I placed Sam's legal documents on the desk. Let's talk about Travis's debt. Victor smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Your husband owes me $200,000. The terms were clear. Show me. He slid a leather folder across the desk. Inside were promissory notes, each signed in Travis's familiar scrawl. The dates aligned perfectly with our missing savings, the withdrawn inheritance, the gallery payments to Lila. And the interest? I asked. Compounds daily. Currently at 40%. My hands clenched in my lap. That's illegal. So is gambling in my establishment. Yet here we are. Victor leaned forward. I understand you have access to the remaining insurance money? I do. But I have conditions. His eyebrow raised slightly. You're not in a position to negotiate, Mrs. Parker. Actually, I am. I pulled out my phone, showing him the email from Sam. This money legally belongs to Maggie Mitchell. One call from me, and she'll know everything, the gambling, the debt, the threats. How do you think it'll look when a grieving widow goes to the police about loan sharks threatening her son? Victor's smile vanished. You're playing a dangerous game. No, I'm ending one. I met his gaze steadily. Here's my offer, I'll transfer the insurance money, all $150,000. In exchange, you'll sign a document stating Travis's debt is paid in full. And you'll never contact him again. That's less than what he owes. It's more than you'll get if I walk out that door. The silence stretched between us like a wire about to snap. Finally, Victor nodded to one of his men, who produced a document. Sign here, Victor said. The money first, then I sign. My hand shook as I made the transfer. When it was done, Victor signed the release with a flourish. A pleasure doing business, he said. Though I'm curious, why save him? After everything he's done? I'm not saving him, I replied, standing. I'm making sure he faces the right consequences. Outside, Travis was waiting by the car, pacing nervously. Evie? What happened? Are we okay? I handed him the signed release. The debt's paid. You're free. His shoulders sagged with relief. Thank God. Baby, I promise I'll make this up to you. We can start fresh. No, Travis. We can't. He froze. What do you mean? I mean, I just used your mother's inheritance to save your life. Money that was meant to support her after losing your father. I stepped back as he reached for me. The gallery's pressing charges for fraud. Lila's lawyer will be contacting you about the stolen funds. And I've already filed for divorce. Evie, please. You have two choices, I cut him off. Either you check into rehab today, right now, or I call your mother and tell her everything. How you gambled away her husband's insurance money. How you stole from a grieving artist. How you nearly got us both killed. Travis's face crumpled. I need help, he whispered. I know. I pulled out one last piece of paper, the admission form for a treatment center. That's why I already made the arrangements. Will you? He swallowed hard. Will you wait for me? I thought about all the nights I'd waited for him, not knowing he was gambling away our future. About Lila, waiting in her gallery for a man who'd never really existed. About Maggie, still waiting for her son to become the man his father had been. No, I said softly. But maybe someday, you'll be someone worth waiting for. I watched as Victor's men escorted Travis to another car, heading for the treatment center. My phone buzzed with a text from Sam, papers filed. You okay? I looked at our reflection in the building's mirrored surface, Travis disappearing into the car, me standing alone in the afternoon sun. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. No, I texted back. But I will be. 3 weeks after Travis entered rehab, Maggie showed up at my apartment unannounced. She stood in my doorway, clutching her handbag like a shield, looking older than I'd ever seen her. Were you ever going to tell me? Her voice trembled. About what Travis did with Robert's money. I stepped aside to let her in. How did you find out? The insurance company called about some paperwork. She sank onto my couch. I started asking questions. Then I spoke to Lila. Her eyes met mine. That poor girl. How could he? The kettle whistled in the kitchen, giving me a moment to collect myself. When I returned with 2 cups of tea, Maggie had pulled out a stack of letters. He's been writing to me from the facility, she said. Trying to explain. But I need to hear it from you, Evie. All of it. So I told her everything, the gambling, the lies, the debt to Victor. With each revelation, her hands gripped the letters tighter, knuckles white against the paper. I should have seen it, she whispered. The signs were all there, just like with his father. I nearly dropped my cup. What? Why do you think Robert had such a large life insurance policy? Her laugh was bitter. He got it after his first stint in rehab, 20 years ago. Said it was to protect us if he relapsed. The pieces clicked into place, Travis's secrecy, his father's sudden heart attack last year. The way Maggie had insisted on handling all the funeral arrangements alone. Did Travis know? About his father? No. Robert made me promise never to tell him. He was afraid Travis would. She closed her eyes. Would follow the same path. My phone buzzed, a text from the rehab facility, Travis Mitchell requesting immediate family visit. Urgent. Maggie saw the message over my shoulder. We should go together. The facility was an hour outside the city. During the drive, Maggie told me more about Robert, his struggles, his recoveries. His final relapse that led to that fatal night at a casino in Vegas. By the time we arrived, I felt the weight of 2 generations of addiction pressing down on us. Travis was waiting in the visitor's room, wearing facility-issued sweats that made him look somehow younger and older at the same time. When he saw Maggie, his face crumpled. Mom? What are you doing here? She stepped forward. Learning that my son is more like his father than I ever wanted him to be. Travis went pale. What do you mean? The gambling, Travis. The lies. Your father. She took a shaky breath. Your father died chasing one last win. Just like you almost did. He collapsed into a chair, hands shaking. Dad was. Like me? No, Maggie's voice hardened. You're like him. And I won't watch another Mitchell man destroy himself and everyone around him. I'm getting help, Travis protested. I'm trying to change. Are you? I cut in. Or are you just trying to win me back? Like another game you think you can play? Evie, please. Mom. He looked between us desperately. I know I messed up. But I'm doing the work. I'm facing everything I've done. Then face this, Maggie pulled out one last letter, not from the stack Travis had sent, but an older one, yellowed with age. Your father wrote this before he died. I think it's time you read it. Travis took the letter with trembling hands. As he read, tears began rolling down his face. When he finished, he looked up at his mother with new understanding. He was trying to win back what he lost, Travis whispered. Just like I was. The difference is, Maggie said softly, you still have a chance to choose a different ending. I watched them embrace, mother and son united in grief and hope. In that moment, I realized that sometimes the greatest act of revenge isn't about making someone suffer, it's about forcing them to face the truth. No matter how painful that truth might be. As I turned to leave, Travis called out, Evie, wait. There's something else you need to know. 6 months after Travis entered rehab, I sat in Lila's gallery, surrounded by her new exhibition. The walls were covered with photographs, not Travis's this time, but her own. Images of broken things made beautiful, shattered mirrors, cracked pottery filled with gold, weathered buildings reclaimed by nature. It's called restoration, Lila said, handing me a glass of wine. Sometimes things have to break completely before they can be rebuilt. I studied a particularly striking image of a wedding ring half buried in sand. Is that the one Travis gave me? Yes. She smiled without bitterness. I almost threw it into the ocean, but then I thought, why waste good art material? The gallery door chimed. Maggie entered, followed by Travis. He looked different, thinner, but somehow more substantial. Real. His eyes met mine briefly before focusing on the photographs. These are incredible, Lila, he said softly. Thank you. She straightened her shoulders. The proceeds are going to a gambling addiction support center. Seemed fitting. Travis nodded, then pulled an envelope from his jacket. I've been working with my counselor on making amends. This is the first installment to repay what I took from the gallery. Lila took the envelope without opening it. Keep it. Fund someone else's recovery instead. I don't deserve your forgiveness. No, she agreed. But you have it anyway. That's how healing works. As Lila led Maggie through the exhibition, Travis turned to me. I found a job. Teaching photography at the community center. It's not much, but it's honest work. I heard, I said. Sam told me you're also volunteering at the addiction hotline. 3 nights a week. He hesitated. I got my 90-day chip yesterday. Congratulations. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. Finally, Travis pulled out another envelope, this one worn, like it had been carried for weeks. I wrote this during my 4th week in rehab, he said. After I read my dad's letter. I've rewritten it dozens of times, but... well, you should just read it. I opened the envelope slowly, aware of his eyes on me as I unfolded the pages. Dear Evie, it began. I used to think rock bottom was losing all our money, or facing Victor, or watching you walk away. But real rock bottom was realizing that I'd become my father's son in all the wrong ways. While ignoring the one lesson he tried to teach me through his death, that love isn't about winning or losing, it's about choosing, every day, to be worthy of it. The letter continued, detailing his struggles, his shame, his gradual understanding of the damage he'd caused. But it was the final paragraph that made my hands shake. I'm not asking you to take me back. I'm not even asking for forgiveness. I'm writing to tell you that you were right about everything. Your revenge wasn't making me pay the money back or forcing me into rehab. Your revenge was making me face myself, completely and honestly, for the first time in my life. And for that, I will always be grateful. I folded the letter carefully, aware of the weight of everything unsaid between us. The divorce papers are final next week, I said quietly. I know. Travis smiled sadly. You know what's strange? For the first time in my life, I'm not trying to win anything back. I'm just trying to be better. Across the gallery, Lila was showing Maggie a photograph of a broken clock, its gears scattered but glinting with possibility. The late afternoon sun caught the image, casting fractured light across the floor between Travis and me. Maybe that's the real difference between you and your father, I said. You're learning to live with the pieces, instead of trying to gamble them back together. Travis nodded, understanding in his eyes. As I turned to leave, he called out one last time. Evie? Thank you. For making me fold when you did. I paused at the door, looking back at the exhibition title, Restoration. Sometimes, I said, losing everything is the only way to find out what's worth keeping. Outside, the city was painted in sunset colors, broken and beautiful and full of possibilities. I walked toward it, leaving the gallery and Travis behind, knowing that some things need to stay broken to remind us why we choose to heal.
I never imagined that I would be sitting in the living room of our former home, feeling as though I had never been here before. I'm Emily, and I was enjoying what I believed to be a happy life with my husband, Mark, until a few months ago. I thought we were the pair that everyone admired. Mark had changed from being a kind man to someone I barely knew. His eyes, which had been warm, suddenly were frigid and far away. With the death of my father, everything changed. Losing my dad was like losing a piece of myself since he was my rock. For Mark, however, it appeared to be a chance. I was sitting opposite Mark in the stifling evening air. The laughter and joy that used to fill this room were a sharp contrast to the stillness that existed between us. Are you even listening to me, Emily? The quiet was broken by Mark's piercing, agitated voice. I raised my head to meet his eyes. I said, "Yes, I'm listening," in a voice that was almost audible above a whisper. It's easy. I'd like a divorce. I've spoken with a lawyer already. This house belongs to me. You must begin your search for a new residence. His remarks were like a ton of bricks to me. I had seen that we were getting farther apart, but divorce? I couldn't speak. Mark, you can't be serious. Are you simply going to discard everything after all these years? I said it at last, with a hint of incredulity in my voice. With a chilly, unimpressed expression on his face, Mark reclined in his chair. Emily, it's not simply throwing away. Things are changing. I've been feeling stuck in this marriage, and now that your father is no longer with us, I don't see the need to keep up this facade. I experienced a mix of sadness and rage. How could he be so callous and cruel? In addition to my father's absence, Mark, whom I had trusted and loved, was also leaving me. Mark, I don't understand you. You used to be so unique and kind. What became of us? Mark laughed sarcastically. Oh, Emily, please don't put up with the drama. Packing should begin. It's best that you leave as soon as possible. Stunned and saddened, I sat there trying to take it all in. Not only did our marriage fail, but an illusion, the image of a beautiful existence that I had held onto for so long, was shattered. And now I was alone myself, with only recollections of a love that proved to be a facade. The entrance of Mark's mother, Mrs. Harwood, further descended into turmoil in my already precarious existence. She entered the house without warning, bringing with her a hostile aura that suffocated the already tense environment. With a stern voice, Mrs. Harwood sat down in the living room and said, "Emily, I expect you to behave appropriately while I'm here," clearly feeling in control. I made an effort to reason with her. "Mrs. Harwood, I understand this is a difficult time for everyone, but I assure you, I have no intention of causing trouble." She gave me a chilly look. "My darling, trouble seems to follow you. I've observed your and Mark's lifestyle. My son's desire for a divorce is understandable." I wasn't going to let her walk over me, even if her remarks were hurtful. "Mark and I have grown up. We'll take care of things on our own. You don't need to meddle." She laughed. "Interference. I'm shielding my son from your deceptive tactics. You've already caused enough harm." The days that followed were a haze of Mrs. Harwood's incessant insults and disparaging remarks. She was critical of everything, even my cooking and clothing choices. She seemed to be attempting to remove me from the house. She entered the kitchen one evening when I was making dinner. "You're overdoing the salt. Are you completely ignorant of cooking?" I tried to maintain my composure by clenching my jaw. I spent years preparing meals for Mark and myself. He has never voiced any complaints. But I'm not, and he's too nice to say anything. "Your awful cooking is destroying his health." I was shocked by this woman's boldness. "Mrs. Harwood, I appreciate your concern, but I can manage." Leaning on the counter, she kept a hawk eye on me. "You're capable, aren't you? How long that lasts will be determined." Every encounter with her was a practice in self-control. She had strong opinions about everything and didn't hesitate to express them frequently. She seemed to be attempting to agitate me, to test my limits. There was nothing Mark could do to defuse the situation. I had to defend myself against his mother's constant attacks since he avoided being in the same room as us. He was obviously not interested in defending me. No more. One morning, as I sat at the breakfast table, Mrs. Harwood sat across from me, her eyes cold and calculating. "You know, Emily, it's not too late to leave gracefully. You could save yourself a lot of trouble." I met her gaze, my resolve hardening. "I have as much right to be here as you do, Mrs. Harwood. I'm not leaving until the divorce is finalized." She smirked. "Stubborn, aren't you? Well, we'll see how long that lasts. Mark doesn't want you here, and neither do I. You're just a guest, and guests can be asked to leave." Her words echoed in my head, a constant reminder of the unwelcome and precarious position I found myself in. But I wasn't about to give up. I had to stand my ground, no matter how difficult Mrs. Harwood made it. The house had become a battleground, and I was determined not to be the one who surrendered. Living with Mrs. Harwood under the same roof was like walking on eggshells. But the day she crossed the line was when she targeted my cat, Whiskers. Whiskers was more than just a pet. He was a part of my world, a comfort in my loneliest times. I came home to find Mrs. Harwood standing in the hallway, a look of disgust on her face as she glared at Whiskers. "That filthy animal," she spat. "I wanted out of my son's house. It's either the cat or you, Emily." I felt a surge of anger. Whiskers isn't going anywhere. He's part of this family. She sneered. "That thing is a nuisance. I won't have it shedding and spreading germs all over." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "He's a harmless cat, Mrs. Harwood. You're being unreasonable." She moved closer, her voice cold and harsh. Listen here, Emily. I call the shots now. Either that cat goes, or things will get very unpleasant for you. I knew arguing with her was futile. She had made up her mind, and nothing I said would change it. I had to think fast. That's when I remembered my friend Sarah, an animal lover who had always adored Whiskers. I called Sarah, my voice shaky. Sarah, I need a huge favor. Can you look after Whiskers for a while? I'm in a bit of a situation here. Sarah was quick to respond. Of course, Emily. What's going on? Are you okay? I sighed. It's a long story. I'll explain later, but thank you. You're a lifesaver. Packing Whiskers things felt like a defeat, but I knew it was for the best. As I was about to leave with Whiskers, Mrs. Harwood blocked my path. Finally, some sense, she said, a smug smile on her face. I knew you'd do the right thing. I held back my anger. This isn't over, Mrs. Harwood. I'm doing this for Whiskers, not for you. She laughed. Oh, keep telling yourself that, dear. But we both know who's in charge here. One day, I found my clothes ruined, my favorite dress, my comfy sweaters. Everything was bleached. It was no accident. I stormed into the living room where Mrs. Harwood was reading a magazine, looking too innocent. Did you do this? I held up the ruined dress, my voice shaking with anger. She looked up, feigning surprise. Oh dear, what happened to your dress? Don't play dumb, Mrs. Harwood. You put bleach in the wash, I accused. She shrugged, a smirk creeping onto her face. Oh, that? I was cleaning the machine. Must have forgotten to rinse it out. Accidents happen, dear. I was fuming. This wasn't an accident. You did this on purpose. She leaned back, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Prove it, Emily. It's my word against yours, and we both know who my son will believe. I felt helpless and defeated. She was right. Mark would never take my side over his mother's. Later that day, I confronted Mark. Your mother ruined my clothes. You need to talk to her. Mark didn't even look up from his phone. Mom said it was an accident. Stop making a big deal out of everything. I couldn't believe his indifference. She's doing this on purpose, I said. Mark, can't you see what she's doing? He sighed, annoyed. Look, Emily, I don't want to get involved. Just stay out of her way. Stay out of her way. This was supposed to be my home, too. I realized then that I was alone in this. Mark wouldn't help me. His mother was out to get me, and I had to fend for myself. The destruction of my clothes was just the beginning of Mrs. Harwood's campaign against me. Each day brought a new challenge, a new way for her to assert her dominance, and make me feel unwelcome in my own home. I started to notice little things missing or out of place. My favorite mug was cracked, my pictures taken down from the walls. Small but personal attacks. It was a psychological game, and she was playing to win. One evening, I came home to find the living room in a mess. My books were scattered on the floor, pages torn. I confronted Mrs. Harwood, who was sitting calmly with a cup of tea. Did you do this? I asked, holding up a torn book. She glanced at it, then back at me with a cold, indifferent expression. Oh, those old things. I thought they were trash. You should be more careful about what you leave around. I was outraged. These are my books, Mrs. Harwood. You have no right to touch them. She shrugged, unfazed. This is my son's house. I'll do as I please. Maybe you should start packing your trash. I felt a burning anger, but also a sense of helplessness. Arguing with her was pointless. She had made it clear that she didn't respect me or my belongings. The next morning, I found my toiletries thrown in the trash, my shampoo, my face cream, everything gone. I dug them out, my hands shaking with anger. This was more than just petty sabotage. It was a declaration of war. I confronted Mark again. Your mother threw away my toiletries. This has to stop. He barely glanced at me. Maybe it was a mistake. A mistake. She's doing this deliberately, Mark. Can't you see that? I was near tears, frustrated by his continued indifference. He stood up, his voice cold. I'm not getting into this, Emily. Sort it out with her. Sort it out with her. How was I supposed to sort out deliberate cruelty? I tried to keep to myself to avoid Mrs. Harwood, but she seemed to take my avoidance as a challenge. She'd make loud, snide comments about me on the phone, ensuring I could hear every word. She'd accidentally spill things on the floor I just cleaned, watching me as I cleaned up, a satisfied smirk on her face. One afternoon, I found my laptop screen cracked. It was the last straw. I stormed into the kitchen where Mrs. Harwood was humming to herself. What did you do to my laptop? I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. She turned, feigning ignorance. Oh, did something happen to your laptop? That's unfortunate. You did this, didn't you? You're trying to make my life hell. She leaned in, her voice a venomous whisper. You brought this on yourself, Emily. You're not wanted here. The sooner you realize that, the better. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse with Mrs. Harwood, she struck where it hurt the most, my father's pictures. The last memories I had of him were gone. I had put them up in the living room, a small comfort in these trying times. But now the walls were bare, as if he had never been a part of my life. I found Mrs. Harwood in the kitchen, smirking over a cup of coffee. Where are my father's pictures? I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up, feigning confusion. Pictures? Oh, those old things. We needed more space. This isn't a shrine, Emily. I felt a surge of anger, my hands trembling. Those were my father's pictures. You had no right to take them down. She shrugged, her voice cold and dismissive. They were depressing, always staring at us. It's time to move on, Emily. He's gone, and clinging to the past won't change that. I couldn't believe her cruelty. You can't just erase him from my life. Those pictures were all I had left of him. She stood up, towering over me. Your father has nothing to do with this house. It's time you accepted that and moved on. Just like your marriage. It's in the past now. I wanted to scream, to cry, to do something to show how much she had hurt me. But I knew that's what she wanted, so I held back, biting my tongue. You're heartless, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She laughed, a harsh, grating sound. I'm practical, Emily. It's a trait you clearly lack. You should learn to let go. I left the kitchen, my heart heavy with loss and anger. Mrs. Harwood had taken the last piece of my father from me, and it felt like losing him all over again. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The empty spaces on the walls echoed in my mind. Mrs. Harwood's words kept replaying in my head. Let go. Move on. But how could I? Those pictures were more than just images. They were a connection to my father, a reminder of his love and presence in my life. I knew then that this was more than just a battle over living space. It was a fight for my memories, my past, and my identity. Mrs. Harwood had declared war on the most personal parts of my life, and I couldn't let her win. I had to find a way to fight back, to reclaim my father's memory and my right to mourn him. It was a battle I couldn't afford to lose. Just when I thought all hope was lost, a call from a notary changed everything. I was sitting in my room, trying to muster the strength to face another day with Mrs. Harwood when my phone rang. Mrs. Emily Harwood? This is John Carter, the notary handling your father's will. "We need you to come in to discuss some important matters," the voice on the other end said. I was taken aback. My father's will? I wasn't aware he had left anything. "Yes, he did. It's quite urgent. Can you come in today?" Mr. Carter's tone was serious. I agreed, curiosity and a glimmer of hope stirring within me. Maybe this was the break I needed. At the notary's office, Mr. Carter handed me a folder. "Your father left you a significant amount of money, Miss Emily, enough to start a new life." I was speechless. My father, always the quiet supporter, had given me a lifeline. "And there's something else," Mr. Carter continued, handing me another set of documents. "Your father left these for you. He said they were important." I opened the documents, but Mr. Carter stopped me. "Perhaps you should look at these in private. They're quite personal." I nodded, clutching the folder tightly as I left the office. Back home, I locked myself in my room and began to read. The documents were records of financial transactions between my father and Mark. My father had lent Mark a significant amount of money, over $200,000. I couldn't believe it. All this time, Mark had been in debt to my father. Was this why he was so eager to divorce me after my father's death? Did he think the debt died with him? I felt a surge of strength. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had the upper hand. My father had given me more than just money. He had given me the power to fight back. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I was going to make Mark pay for his deceit and Mrs. Harwood for her cruelty. The tables had turned, and it was my turn to set the rules. Armed with the truth about Mark's debt to my father, I felt a newfound sense of power. The day of the divorce signing, I was ready to turn the tables. As we sat in the lawyer's office, Mark and his mother smirking confidently, I waited for the right moment. Just as Mark was about to sign, I spoke up. "Before we finalize this, there's something you should know, Mark," I said, sliding the loan documents across the table. He glanced at them, his smirk fading fast. "What's this?" I leaned back, feeling in control for the first time in months. "That's the debt you owe my father, over $200,000. And now it's owed to me." Mrs. Harwood's eyes widened in shock. "What debt, Mark? What is she talking about?" Mark's face was a mask of panic. "It's nothing, Mom. Just some old business between Emily's dad and me." I laughed so. "You thought you'd get away with not repaying him. That's why you were so eager to get rid of me." Mark didn't meet my eyes. "It's complicated, Emily. I was in trouble, and your dad offered to help." I shook my head, disgusted. "You were going to leave me with nothing while sitting on a debt you owed my father. You're despicable." He tried to touch me, but I backed away. "You've been hiding this. You owe me that money, and I intend to collect." The lawyer, a middle-aged man who had been silent until now, interjected. "If these documents are legitimate, Mr. Mark, you're legally obligated to repay this debt." Mrs. Harwood turned to her son, her voice rising. "You borrowed money from her father, and now we have to pay her." Mark tried to speak, but I was faster. Yes, he did, and he thought he could escape it by divorcing me quickly after my father's death. The room was tense, the air thick with the revelation. Mrs. Harwood looked from the documents to Mark, her expression one of betrayal and anger. "You've been lying to us all along," she hissed at Mark. "You put us in this mess." Mark's usual confident demeanor had crumbled. He looked defeated, cornered. I had no choice. I was in trouble, and Emily's dad offered to help. I stood up, feeling a rush of satisfaction. "Well, now you can repay that help, every single dollar. You thought you could outsmart me, but you were wrong." Mrs. Harwood was fuming. "We'll fight this. We won't let you take everything from us." But I knew I had the upper hand. You can try, but the law is on my side. I suggest you start figuring out how you're going to repay the debt. As I walked out of the lawyer's office, I felt a sense of triumph. For so long, I had been under Mark and his mother's control, their whims and cruelty dictating my life. But now the tables had turned. I had them right where I wanted them, and I wasn't going to let them off easy. This was my chance to get back what I was owed, and I was going to take it. The day Mark and Mrs. Harwood sold the house to repay the debt was the day I finally felt free. As they packed their last boxes, I couldn't help but savor the moment. "You brought this on yourself, Mark," I said, watching him struggle with a heavy box. "You could have been honest with me." His shoulders drooped as he avoided looking at me. "I understand. I apologize, Emily." Mrs. Harwood added, seeming older and more dejected than before. "You are solely to blame for this. Everything has been damaged by you." Her words had no effect on me anymore, so I shook my head. "You too caused this on yourself, Mrs. Harwood. I'm merely asserting my ownership of what is legitimately mine." Without saying another word, they drove off, and I saw their automobile vanish from view. An age of suffering and treachery, but also of development and fortitude, was coming to a close. I inhaled deeply as I felt the burden of the last several months subside. Time to make a fresh start. I brought Whiskers home with me and used the money I received from my father and the debt repayment to purchase a modest but comfortable home for us. I phoned my friend Sarah, who had supported me during my worst moments, while I sat in my new living room with Whiskers purring on my lap. "Hi, Sarah, it's finished." With a smile on my face, I declared, "I'm at last free." Sarah spoke in a kind and animated tone. "Emily, it is incredible. I'm really pleased with you. You've made such progress." A feeling of tranquility descended upon me as I surveyed my new house. I have, and I owe it all to those who supported me, like you. All the happiness in the world is yours to have. "Emily, what's next for you?" Sarah inquired. I paused to reflect. A new beginning. Constructing a life that is genuinely mine. And perhaps provide assistance to those who have experienced what I have. This was more than simply a new house, I thought as I hung up. A new chapter had begun, one in which I was in charge, and no longer had to deal with the ghosts of the past. In addition to surviving, I had emerged stronger. I got up and headed to the window to gaze out at my little garden, Whiskers trailing after me. It was a fresh start, an opportunity to start again and discover happiness in the little things. Despite the fact that I had lost a lot, I had gained strength, bravery, and a sense of self. This was my journey, my tale, and it was only getting started.